He thought he was marrying a plain country widow, someone quiet, someone easy to forget. But out here under the brutal sun and among the endless dust, nothing, and no one, is ever quite what they seem. When Beau McCallister offered Maren Ellsworth a hand in marriage, he thought he was saving her. He never imagined she would be the one to teach him what love truly means. The dry wind swept across the open plains, carrying with it the heavy scent of dust and desperation. Beau McCallister stood on the porch of the dusty saloon, his battered hat pulled low over his brow, shielding his eyes from the brutal afternoon sun. His boots, worn and cracked, tapped anxiously against the wooden planks as he reread the letter clenched in his calloused hand. It was from the bank. 30 days. 30 days to secure a family establishment or lose the land his father had broken his back to tame. Sam cursed under his breath, crumpling the letter and shoving it into his coat pocket. He'd been a fool to think they'd let him keep the ranch after June passed. A man alone, they said, was a liability. A ranch needed a family, a home. It needed stability. Stability. What a goddamn joke. He stepped off the porch and made his way down the main street of Fox Hollow, the small town barely clinging to life in the merciless stretch between Albuquerque and nothingness. Eyes followed him, whispers fluttering like paper in the wind. That's Harper. Lost everything but that stubborn pride. Too proud to beg. Too broken to build again. Sam ignored them. Let them talk. Words didn't mend fences or birth calves. As he passed the general store, he caught a glimpse of a woman arranging jars in the window. She was plain, no way around it. Faded brown dress, hair pulled back in a tight, no-nonsense bun. No jewelry. No smile. Just quiet hands doing quiet work. Maren Bell, murmured Mrs. Carter, the shopkeeper's wife, who had slipped out to sweep the stoop. Poor thing. Husband died 2 winters back. Ain't got it, so left. Sam paused. He hadn't been looking for a wife. Hell, he hadn't been looking for anything but a way to survive. But something about the way Maren moved, steady, precise, resilient, caught at the raw places inside him. He didn't need love, didn't want it. Not again. He needed someone willing, someone who understood hard times and harder land. And if she said no, well, there were other ways a man could lose everything. Pride, he'd found, was easiest to lose when you had nothing left to fight for. That evening, Sam found himself standing awkwardly on the porch of the small rooming house where Maren lived. The steps creaked under his weight, and he knocked once, twice before stepping back, feeling every inch the fool. The door opened a crack. Maren peered out, suspicion flickering in her pale brown eyes. "Mr. Harper," she said carefully. "Evening, Miss Bell." A long, stiff silence stretched between them. Sam cleared his throat. "I'd like a word if you've got a minute." Maren hesitated before opening the door wider, gesturing him inside. The room behind her was small but clean, smelling faintly of soap and kerosene. A single chair, a narrow bed, a Bible on the nightstand. Sam remained standing. "I'll be straight with you," he said, voice rough as gravel. "I need a wife, not for love, or," he stumbled, "for anything soft. It's business." Maren's hands tightened around the edge of the door. "Business," she repeated. "The bank's breathing down my neck. They'll take my ranch if I don't marry. They want stability, family." He felt the weight of her gaze, sharp, assessing. "And you thought of me," she said, a wry twist to her lips. "You're alone." "I'm plain," Sam winced, but didn't deny. "Dirty up." Maren straightened her spine. There was pride there too. Pride layered under all the grief and silence. "What would I gain?" she asked. "A roof, a home, protection." Protection. It sounded hollow even as he said it. He hadn't protected anyone since June died. He hadn't even protected himself. Maren's gaze drifted past him, to the fading light slipping through the dirty window. After a long moment, she said, "When?" "Tomorrow. Pastor leaves town after Sunday." Her jaw tightened. Sam could see the war raging behind her calm face. Desperation against dignity. Fear against the gnawing hunger that came from too many meals. Missed. Finally, she nodded once. "All right." Sam exhaled, a breath he hadn't known he was holding. She closed the door quietly without another word. Sam stood there for a long time, listening to the faint shuffle of her footsteps inside. The setting sun bled across the horizon, staining the sky with desperate color. He'd secured a wife. He'd secured the ranch. But as he walked back toward his empty house, a strange heaviness settled in his chest, heavier even than the threat of losing everything. He hadn't seen it before, but he felt it now, clawing at the edges of his mind. You can bind two people with words and promises, but some wounds, hers, ran deeper than any contract could heal. and some debts demanded payment, not in gold, but in blood and bone, hope and heartbreak. The plain country widow and the broken rancher had struck a bargain, but neither of them yet understood the price. The morning sun rose hard and hot over Dry Creek, burning away any illusions of gentleness. Dust clung to every surface, and the town's single street came alive with gossip, faster than the blacksmith's hammer could fall. Beau McCallister adjusted the stiff collar of the only decent shirt he owned, sweat already gathering at the back of his neck. He waited outside the modest chapel, his jaw locked tight, feeling like a condemned man rather than a groom. Maren arrived alone. No lace, no flowers, no procession, just her faded brown dress, freshly washed, and a simple white scarf tied over her hair. She held her chin high, even as the townsfolk stared, some with pity, others with poorly hidden scorn. "Look at her," hissed a woman in the crowd. "Couldn't even find a proper wife, had to settle for her." Sam caught the words. He saw the flicker of pain that crossed Maren's face before she pressed her lips tighter and kept walking. Something twisted sharply in his chest. The pastor cleared his throat and the ceremony began. It was quick, almost brutally so. No tender words, no promises of love, just obligations spoken in clipped tones. Sam slid the simple iron ring onto Maren's finger. A ring meant more to satisfy the bank's paperwork than her dreams. "You may kiss the bride," the pastor said awkwardly. They hesitated. Sam leaned forward, brushing the lightest kiss on Maren's forehead, more an apology than a celebration. The townspeople barely waited for the final amen before turning away, their whispers louder than church bells. "Won't last the winter. Poor fool thinks land's enough to build a home." Sam didn't offer Maren his arm. He didn't know how. Instead he muttered, "Let's go," and led her down the steps back into the full glare of judgment. The ride to McCallister Ranch was long and silent. Maren sat side saddle on the old mare Sam had borrowed from a neighbor, her hands folded neatly, in her lap, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Sam kept stealing glances at her. Why had she agreed so quickly? Pride maybe, desperation surely, but something else simmered beneath her calm exterior, something he couldn't name yet. They crossed the dry riverbed, passed the line of skeletal cottonwoods, and finally reached the ranch. The house loomed ahead, 2 stories of cracked timber and broken dreams. It had once been a proud home. Now it stood battered, a ghost of better times. Sam dismounted first, tying his horse and then awkwardly helping Maren down. Her hand was small and cool in his. She barely looked at him. He showed her inside. The parlor was bare but for a crooked table and 2 chairs. The kitchen smelled faintly of dust and stale coffee. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms, one his, the other untouched since June. "You can take whichever room you want," he said gruffly. Maren nodded. "Thank you." She chose the smaller room without hesitation, setting down the battered carpet bag she'd brought with her. Sam watched her for a moment longer, then retreated to the porch. He needed air, space, distance. He lit a cigarette with shaking fingers, staring out at the parched fields. His land, what was left of it, stretched wide and stubborn, refusing to die even as everything else did. Inside, Maren moved quietly. She unpacked a worn quilt, smoothing it over the narrow bed. She placed a small framed sketch, a simple drawing of a tree, on the nightstand, the only piece of beauty she had dared bring with her. The sun dipped low, setting fire to the sky. Sam stayed outside until darkness swallowed the land. Only when the cold crept in did he return, finding Maren sitting at the kitchen table, mending a ripped sleeve with careful stitches. Neither spoke, neither needed to. They had made their bargain before God and man, and now they would live with it. Whether they survived it, together or apart, was a question neither dared to ask. Not yet. The first night at McCallister Ranch was colder than the desert air outside. Maren sat alone in the kitchen, her hands folded neatly in her lap, listening to the creaks and groans of the old house settling around her. Somewhere upstairs, Sam moved. Heavy footsteps, a door closing with a soft thud, then silence. She let out a slow breath. No welcome, no conversation, just 2 strangers trapped under the same weary roof. She rose from the table and checked the stove. The fire had died hours ago, leaving only a few sullen embers. There was no more wood inside, and she wasn't about to fumble around in the tie. Dark outside, looking for more. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and climbed the narrow staircase to her room. The small bed sagged in the middle. The quilt she had brought from town was thin, but it was better than nothing. She lay there stiffly, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the low howl of the wind outside. It wasn't fear that kept her awake. Maren had lived through worse. Hunger, loss, shame. But there was an ache now somewhere deeper, a hollow longing for something she had almost forgotten existed. Kindness. She wasn't foolish enough to expect love from Beau McCallister. He hadn't pretended otherwise. But she had hoped maybe for a little humanity. Hours later, when sleep finally took her, it was restless and thin, full of half-formed dreams she could not quite remember. Morning came hard and early. Sam was already outside. When Maren stepped onto the porch, her shawl pulled tight against the chill. He was splitting wood with violent efficiency, each swing of the axe punctuated by a grunt. She watched him for a moment before turning toward the henhouse. The door hung loose on one hinge, and most of the hens had scattered. She spent the next hour gathering them, coaxing them back with handfuls of grain she found in the barn. When she returned to the house, Sam was seated at the table, sipping black coffee. He didn't look up. "There's bread on the counter," he said, voice flat. Maren found a hard, stale loaf wrapped in cloth. She sliced off a piece, her hand steady, and sat across from him. They ate in silence, chewing through the thick, joyless meal. Finally, Sam spoke. "You don't have to stay here all day," he said. "Ain't much for a woman to do." Maren's mouth tightened. "I'm used to work." He shrugged as if it made no difference to him. "Suit yourself." He rose from the table, grabbing his hat and heading for the door. Maren watched him go, dust swirling in his wake. The days that followed fell into a grim pattern. Sam worked the fields and repaired the broken fences. Maren tended the chickens, cleaned the house, patched clothes, and made simple meals from the meager supplies they had. They spoke little, not out of anger. There was no energy for that, but because there seemed to be no space for words between them. Each evening Sam returned exhausted, nodding to her before disappearing upstairs. Each night Maren sat by the dying fire, mending or reading from the battered Bible she had brought with her, the words blurring together as loneliness settled heavy in her chest. The house was clean now, but it remained cold, not from lack of firewood, but from something deeper, a chill born of grief, distrust, and the slow erosion of hope. Maren understood it. She carried her own coldness inside after all, but understanding did not make it easier to bear. One afternoon, as Maren scrubbed the kitchen floor, she found a small toy horse wedged beneath the cabinet, carved from wood, its paint chipped and faded. She turned it over in her hands, tracing the worn edges. A child's toy, Sam's son, the one June had lost along with her life. Maren set the toy carefully back where she found it, her heart tightening. Everyone carried their ghosts. Here they lived in plain sight. She stood slowly, brushing dust from her skirt, and stared out the kitchen window. The field stretched wide and empty, the soil cracked and hungry. She had come here for survival, but somewhere deep inside, Maren Bell still carried the smallest, most dangerous of hopes, that life might be more than just surviving. For now, though, survival was enough. It had to be. The days blurred into one another, stitched together by routine and silence. Maren rarely saw Sam's face without the shadow of a hat or the veil of exhaustion. He woke before sunrise, rode out across the cracked fields, and returned only when the stars had begun to prick holes in the sky. At first she told herself it didn't matter. She had what she needed: shelter, food, a fragile sense of belonging to something larger than herself, even if it was only a struggling patch of land. But there were moments, late at night, when loneliness gnawed at her so fiercely it felt like her very bones were hollow. One evening, a sudden crash outside jolted her from the kitchen. Maren rushed onto the porch to find Sam kneeling beside the corral, his body rigid with pain. The gate had splintered, and one of the horses, the bay mare, had kicked out, catching Sam square in the ribs. He was trying to stand, gritting his teeth, but the color had drained from his face. Without thinking, Maren hurried to his side. "Don't," he rasped, waving her off with one bloodied hand. "I'm fine, you're not," she said sharply, more force in her voice than she'd intended. She helped him up, or tried to. Sam was a large man, heavy with muscle and stubbornness. After a few fumbling attempts, he relented just enough to lean against her shoulder as they stumbled back to the house. Inside, Maren lowered him onto a chair and fetched a basin of water. He watched her through narrowed eyes as she worked, dabbing at the gash on his arm, checking the swelling along his side. "You got doctoring skills too," he muttered. "My father was a school teacher," she replied, concentrating on wrapping a bandage. "But he taught me enough to know a broken rib when I see one." Sam grunted. Maren paused, her fingers resting lightly against his chest. Beneath the layers of dust and denim, she felt the steady thud of his heart, strong but guarded, like the man himself. "You should rest," she said finally, stepping back. Sam's mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile, or maybe just a grimace. He pushed himself up, wobbling slightly, and made his way to the battered sofa in the parlor. Maren draped a blanket over him without a word. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Why'd you say yes?" Maren froze. She hadn't expected the question. "Not now. Not ever." She kept her back to him as she answered, choosing her words carefully. "Because I know what it's like," she said softly, "to need something you can't ask for." Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. When she finally dared glance over her shoulder, she found Sam watching her, not with suspicion or anger, but something closer to understanding. Maybe, she thought, he wasn't the only one carrying invisible wounds. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't so different after all. The next morning, Sam insisted on returning to work. Maren watched from the porch as he saddled his horse with stiff, jerky movements. Every time he mounted or lifted something, he winced, but he said nothing. She admired his stubbornness even as she cursed it. That afternoon, while he was gone, Maren decided the house needed more than cleaning. It needed life. She gathered stones from the dry creek bed and arranged them in a crude circle near the porch. She planted the seeds she had tucked away in her carpet bag, wildflowers, hardy things that could survive even this merciless land. As she worked her hands in the soil, Maren felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Small, fragile, but stubborn enough to take root. Just like her, just like Sam, though he didn't know it yet. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky was a pale, blistering blue, and the next it was smeared dark with heavy clouds rolling low across the plains like a herd of angry cattle. Maren was gathering eggs from the henhouse when she heard the distant rumble. She straightened, squinting toward the horizon. A wall of dust and rain barreled toward the ranch, swallowing the landscape as it came. She dropped the basket and ran. The animals were the first concern. The chickens needed to be secured, the horses brought into the barn. She moved quickly, her skirts snagging on broken fence posts, her hands raw from pulling stubborn animals into shelter. The wind picked up, slicing through her shawl, tangling her hair. Dust stung her eyes and the first fat drops of rain began to fall, turning the ground into slippery mud. Where was Sam? Panic flickered through her, sharp and blinding. He had ridden out early that morning to repair a section of the fence at the far end of the property, too far to make it back in time. Maren tied the barn doors shut and turned toward the house, her body shivering violently now. The rain came car pounding against her with furious fists. She slipped once, twice before managing to drag herself up the porch steps. Her fingers, numb and clumsy, fought with the door latch, and then she collapsed inside. Hours passed. The storm raged on, rattling windows, bending trees low to the ground. Thunder cracked like gunfire across the plains. Maren huddled by the fireplace, wrapped in a thin blanket. She fed the flames with whatever scraps of wood she could find, but the fire barely held. She couldn't stop shaking. Her clothes were soaked through, her teeth chattering so hard it hurt. Worse than the cold was the fear. Fear that Sam was out there somewhere, alone against the storm. She tried to pray, but the words felt hollow, swallowed by the roar of the wind. By nightfall, Maren drifted into a half-conscious state, her body too weak to fight the chill. That was how Sam found her. The door slammed open, nearly ripped off its hinges. Sam stumbled inside, soaked to the bone, mud splattered up to his knees. His eyes found her instantly, a small, crumpled figure by the dying fire. "Maren," he breathed, crossing the room in 3 long strides. She stirred weakly at the sound of his voice. "You're back," she whispered, her lips blue. Sam dropped to his knees beside her, his hands rough but careful as he pulled the wet blanket away and replaced it with his own heavy coat. "Should have been inside," he muttered, half to himself, half to her. "I had to save the animals," she murmured, a faint, exhausted smile on her lips. Sam cursed under his breath, not at her but at himself. He should have been there, should have known the storm would turn so fast. He lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and yet he felt the unbearable weight of her trust settle over him. Upstairs, he placed her gently in his own bed, layering every blanket he could find over her. He sat by her side through the night, feeding the fire, forcing her to sip hot broth when she could manage it. Not once did he leave her, not once did he let go of her hand. When dawn broke, pale and trembling over the landscape, Maren finally stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, dazed but clear. Sam was there, slumped in a chair, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "You're safe," he said, his voice rough with sleeplessness. Maren tried to smile, but her lips quivered. A tear slid down her cheek and Sam reached out without thinking, brushing it away with a tenderness that surprised them both. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, no words, no barriers. In that shared silence, something shifted, something precious, something fragile. The storm had come and gone, leaving the land scarred but alive, much like them. And for the first time since their uneasy bargain, Sam and Maren realized that survival wasn't enough. Not anymore. The days after the storm were unlike anything the ranch had seen in years. The earth, cracked and parched for so long, now held puddles in its deepest wounds. The air smelled different too, cleaner, almost sweet, though the mud clung to every step and the fences leaned drunkenly in the softened ground. Maren moved through the wreckage quietly, with a determination that both humbled and unsettled Sam. He watched her from a distance as she worked, sleeves rolled to her elbows, skirts muddied at the hem. She repaired the henhouse door, she patched the roof where the rain had broken through. She gathered fallen branches into neat piles along the fence line, and then one afternoon she did something that stopped Sam cold. She planted a garden, right there by the porch steps. A small patch of life in a land that had forgotten how to hope. He stood by the barn, arms crossed over his chest, a deep frown pulling at his mouth as he watched her kneeling in the dirt, pressing seeds carefully into the soil with her bare hands. Wildflower seeds, fragile, foolish things, the kind of thing a woman plants when she believes tomorrow will come. Sam didn't believe in tomorrow, not anymore, but Maren did. And somehow that belief unsettled him more than any storm ever could. Later that night, after Maren had retired to her room, Sam found himself wandering out to the porch. The stars stretched endless and sharp overhead. The night air crisp against his skin. He stood over the patch of disturbed earth, just dirt and seeds now, no guarantee they'd grow. He crouched down and ran his fingers through the soft soil. It had been a long time since he had touched the earth without thinking, only of what it could give him. Crops, pasture, survival. This felt different. This felt faith, the kind he had lost long ago, buried under grief and regret. Sam sat there a long while, staring at that patch of dirt, feeling something shift painfully inside his chest. The following days brought small changes. Maren's garden became her sanctuary. Every morning before the sun fully rose, she knelt there, tending it with a patience Sam couldn't fathom. He started leaving small things by the garden, scraps of wood for a fence, an old tin pail for water, always without a word. She always noticed, and she always smiled just a little when she did. The house began to change too. Maren scrubbed the windows until the light could finally find its way inside. She patched the curtains, she coaxed the stove back into better service, and even managed to make bread that didn't taste like ash. There was laughter once, low and surprised, when a hen wandered into the kitchen and refused to leave. Sam found himself smiling more than he had in years. He told himself it was the storm, the rain, the relief that the ranch had survived another blow, but deep down he knew better. It was her. Maren Bell, the plain widow he had married out of desperation, was breathing life back into a house, and a man that had long been given up for dead. One evening after supper they sat together on the porch, the silence between them softer. Now, Maren pointed to the horizon where tiny green shoots were beginning to dot the field. "Things grow even here," she said quietly, "if you give them a chance." Sam didn't answer right away. He stared at the fragile garden, at the woman beside him who had planted more than flowers in this broken land. Finally he spoke, his voice low and rough. Maybe they do." Maren turned to him, her face bathed in the soft, forgiving light of sunset. And for the first time, Sam let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, hope could grow in him too. The air grew cooler as autumn crept over Fox Hollow, bringing a rare tenderness to the landscape. The relentless sun softened, the winds gentled, and the night stretched long and full of quiet. It was during one of those nights that Sam stumbled upon the truth. He hadn't meant to pry. He was looking for spare nails in the storage room, at the back of the house, a place cluttered with forgotten tools, rotted saddles, and broken dreams. In a battered trunk, tucked beneath a tarp, he found a bundle of papers, yellowed and fragile. Curious, he pulled them free. Letters. Dozens of them, written in a flowing, educated hand. Words about poetry, about philosophy, about a world far larger and richer than the hard-bitten soil of Fox Hollow. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped carefully in oilskin, he found a certificate. Sam frowned, holding it closer to the lantern. Maren Bell, Bachelor of Letters, Boston Academy for Young Women. He stared at it for a long time, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something less unbelievable. Boston. Education. A life far removed from the dusty, hard existence of Fox Hollow. And yet here she was, kneeling in dirt, patching broken roofs, mending torn sleeves without a whisper of complaint. Why? Why had a woman like that ended up in a place like this? Why had she married a broken man with nothing to offer but a crumbling ranch and a heart full of regrets? The questions gnawed at him through the night. The next morning, he found Maren by the garden, her hands gentle as she coaxed new shoots to light. He approached slowly, the paper clutched awkwardly in his hand. She looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and smiled. That small, hard-won smile that always hit him harder than he wanted to admit. Sam held out the certificate, without a word. Maren froze. For a moment, she said nothing, just stared at the paper, her face pale. Then she rose, dusting off her skirt with trembling hands. "I never meant for you to find that," she said quietly. Sam said nothing. He waited. Maren took a shaky breath. "My father was a respected teacher in Boston," she began. "He wanted more. For me, a life of ideas, not survival. I was engaged once. A wealthy man. A future promised in silk and silver." Her voice hardened. "But then there were whispers, lies, that I had compromised myself, that I wasn't pure enough. No one cared if it was true. Reputation is everything in those circles. One scandal, real or not, and you're done." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I fled before the shame could swallow me whole. I thought maybe out here a woman could start over, be judged for her work, not her past." Her voice broke on the last word. Sam felt something inside him twist painfully. He had known shame, had worn it like a second skin after June's death. He understood running from ghosts that never truly let go. Slowly, he stepped closer. "You didn't owe me that," he said gruffly. "Not then, not now." Maren shook her head. "I didn't want to lie. I just wanted a place to be useful, to matter." Sam reached out, his fingers brushing hers. "You do," he said, voice rough. "You always did." Maren let out a shaky breath, her hand tightening around his. For the first time since they had spoken their hollow vows, something real passed between them. Something built not on necessity but on truth. No more illusions, no more bargains. Only two broken souls, standing side by side, daring to hope that the past didn't have to define them. The winds changed again, as they often did in Fox Hollow, but this time it wasn't rain they carried. It was smoke. Sam caught the scent first, sharp, acrid, cutting through the evening air like a blade. He bolted from the porch, eyes scanning the horizon. A thin black column twisted up from the eastern fence line. "Maren," he shouted, already sprinting toward the barn. She came running from the garden, skirts lifted in one hand, fear flashing across her face. "It's the pasture," Sam barked. "We have to move fast." Without hesitation, Maren grabbed 2 buckets and raced toward the well, working the old pump with frantic energy. Sam saddled the horses, shouting commands over his shoulder, his heart pounding against his ribs. The fire was moving faster than he'd ever seen, hungry flames devouring the brittle grass, racing toward the house. Neighbors were too far to call for help. It was just them, and the choice between losing everything or standing and fighting. Sam tied wet burlap around the horses' noses and released them into the safer fields. Then he turned back, toward Maren, who was already soaking gunny sacks in water, her face grim and determined. "You should get to town," he growled, throwing a sack over his shoulder. "I'm not leaving you," she snapped, fierce enough to stop him cold for half a second. Their eyes locked. No more plain widow, no more broken ranch, just 2 souls, stitched together by stubbornness, facing the end of everything. Together, they worked like mad, beating at the flames, hauling water, stomping out small fires before they could spread. Smoke choked the air, and the heat seared their skin. Ash rained down, clinging to their hair, their clothes, their lashes. At one point, Sam lost sight of Maren in the chaos. Panic surged through him, white hot. "Maren," he roared, spinning around. Through the haze, he saw her, struggling to free a trapped calf from a fallen fence post, the flames licking closer by the second. Without thinking, he charged toward her, ripping the fence aside with brute force. He grabbed the calf with one arm, Maren with the other, and dragged them both back to the relative safety of the barn. They collapsed against the cool stone foundation, coughing and gasping for air. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Maren turned her soot-smudged face toward him, her hand reaching out blindly until it found his. Sam squeezed her fingers hard. They had saved the barn. They had saved the animals. The fields were scorched, the fences half destroyed, but the heart of the ranch still beat. And so did they. Later that night, after the worst had passed, they sat together on the porch steps, side by side. Sam's arm was slung protectively around Maren's shoulders, and she leaned into him without hesitation. The stars blinked overhead, indifferent, witnesses to their exhaustion and stubborn triumph. "You should have gone," Sam said quietly, guilt gnawing at him. Maren shook her head against his chest. "I stayed because this is my home too," she whispered. Sam closed his eyes, feeling the truth of it settle deep inside him. Not just words, not just necessity. Maren Ellsworth had chosen him, not the ranch, not survival. Him. It was the first time in a long, bitter stretch of years that Beau McCallister felt truly chosen, not out of pity, not out of duty, but because someone had seen him and stayed anyway. And in that broken, smoke-stained night, he realized he had chosen her too, no longer out of desperation, but out of something far more dangerous, something far more precious: love. The fire had left scars across the land, blackened earth, broken fences, patches where nothing but ash remained. But life, stubborn and quiet, was already finding its way back. Just like them, Sam moved differently now, less like a man waiting for the world to crumble under him, and more like a man ready to build again. Each morning, he rose early, working the fields, repairing the fences, setting the ranch back to rights. But he wasn't just rebuilding the ranch, he was building something else too, something Maren hadn't seen yet. He worked in secret, careful to keep her away from the old storage shed near the garden. He covered the windows, hauled supplies under the cover of night, and muttered half-hearted excuses whenever Maren grew curious. At first, she let it go, but as the days stretched into weeks, her curiosity grew. Sam caught her once, peeking around the side of the shed. He shook his head, a rare, playful glint in his eyes. "Not yet," he said. Maren smiled, warmth blooming inside her like the wildflowers she had planted. The first hard frost arrived late one night, coating the fields in silver. Sam rose before dawn, his heart hammering harder than it ever had before a cattle drive or a storm. He built a fire in the kitchen, brewed strong coffee, and when Maren appeared wrapped in her shawl, he stood up so fast he nearly knocked over the chair. "Come with me," he said. Without questioning, she followed him outside, the crisp air biting at their skin, their breath clouding in front of them. Sam led her to the He paused at the door, his hand resting on the latch. "For you," he said, roughly, before swinging it open. Maren stepped inside and stopped, her hands flying to her mouth. The shed had been transformed. The walls, once bare and broken, were now lined with shelves filled with books, dozens of them. Volumes of poetry, history, philosophy. Some were old, some clearly bought at great cost. In the center stood a sturdy wooden desk, freshly built, with a chair and a small oil lamp. Against the far wall hung a slate board, clean and ready for lessons. It wasn't just a shed anymore. It was a library, a school, a sanctuary. Tears welled in Maren's eyes, blurring her vision. "You remembered," she whispered. Sam shifted awkwardly, scuffing his boot against the floor. "I figured," he muttered. "You gave up a lot to be here. Thought maybe it was time you got something back." Maren turned to him, her throat too tight for words. Slowly she crossed the room and touched the spine of a book with reverence. She could see it now, herself teaching children, maybe the ranch hands' little ones or any who wanted to learn. A place where knowledge would grow alongside the crops. A place where she mattered. Sam watched her, his heart pounding. He hadn't built this for the ranch. He hadn't built it for appearances. He had built it for her. Because she deserved it. Because she deserved everything he had to give. Maren walked back to him, her eyes shining. Without hesitation, she reached for his hand. "I never wanted riches," she said, voice trembling. "I never needed grand promises." She looked up at him, smiling through her tears. "All I ever wanted was to be seen." Sam cupped her face in his, rough hands tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. "I see you, Maren Ellsworth," he said, voice low and steady. "I see you," and in that moment, in the quiet, broken remains of a shed reborn as a sanctuary, Maren knew she had finally found home. Not in the walls, not in the land, but in the heart of a man who had thought he had nothing left to give, and had given her everything. The ranch didn't heal overnight. Some scars stayed. The scorched fields, the collapsed fences, the charred posts standing like blackened ribs against the sky. But healing had never been about erasing the past. It was about surviving it. And they had survived. Sam and Maren worked side by side as the cold months rolled in. They fixed what could be fixed. They let go of what couldn't. The days were long, the nights longer, but they no longer faced them alone. They had become a team in every sense, moving around each other with a quiet understanding. A bond forged not by obligation but by choice, by love. It was on a clear Sunday afternoon, with the earth still hard underfoot, and the sky impossibly wide, that Sam took Maren's hand and led her to the old cottonwood tree near the edge of the property. The same place where the fence had first fallen years ago. The same place where, months ago, he might have stood alone, watching everything he loved slip away. Now he stood with her. Sam cleared his throat, suddenly nervous, though he'd fought wild cattle and worse storms without blinking. I made a mess of things, he began, his voice rough with emotion. For a long time I thought all I had left was the land. Thought that was enough. He paused, looking down at their joined hands, calloused fingers entwined. But it ain't. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. Not gold, not silver, but iron, hammered and polished by his own hands. A simple, stubborn thing, just like them. Maren's breath caught. I don't have fancy words, Sam said, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. But I know this. I want you, not for the ranch, not for the bank, for me. He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it settled naturally as if it had always been meant to be there. Maren looked up at him, tears sparkling in her eyes. You taught me, Sam said softly, what love means. Maren smiled, wide and free, nothing held back. And you showed me, she whispered, that broken ground can still bloom. Sam leaned down and kissed her, slow and sure, the world falling away around them. No bank notices, no town whispers, no ghosts, only them. Seasons would come and go. There would be droughts, storms, hardships, but there would also be harvests, laughter, life, and in the stubborn soil of Fox Hollow, where nothing should have grown, Sam and Maren built something stronger than land. They built a life, they built a home, they built love, fierce, faithful and everlasting. On barren land, love had taken root, and against all odds, it would bloom. Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the hardest ground. Sam and Maren's story reminds us, love isn't always found in grand promises or perfect beginnings. Sometimes it's built quietly, with courage, patience and heart. If this story touched you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment sharing what part moved you the most, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales of hope, love and second chances.